more than anything else, the one thing that you should start doing today, if you haven't already been doing it, regardless of what sort of a law practice you envision for yourself, is to begin to build up your contacts list now. The smartest thing that I ever did over the course of the last 15 years was to connect on LinkedIn with just about everybody who I came into contact with professionally. Now, of course, there are exceptions, judges and opposing counsel that you're fighting with in difficult litigation. But generally, if I came in contact with somebody professionally over the last 15 years, I connected with them on LinkedIn and I started to build up my contacts list. I didn't understand exactly why this was important, but I just had a sense that it would be important. And now that I have a little bit of more of a mature view on it, particularly in 2023, I've come to realize that connections are currency in the digital age, particularly if your sales strategy, like mine, involves content creation. My experience creating videos like this one and putting them out on my website and on LinkedIn has been awesome. And it's absolutely not something that I would have been able to do when I was working for other people in a large law practice. And this idea of marketing at scale was entirely new. The way that I was marketing when I was working at the big law firm is the traditional way. I was taking lunches and thinking about golf outings and trying to write articles for publications that people don't really read anymore. And I still really do like the personal contact. I still take the lunches. I still like to, press the flesh with professional contacts. I do it all the time. But if I had my choice from the standpoint of business development to go golfing with somebody for 4 hours and hope that I get work from them versus take that same block of time and make a bunch of videos that will be evergreen and seen repeatedly by potential clients for years to come, I'm going to prefer the latter if I'm interested in, what's the most effective way to try to, bring in new clients to my firm. And I've talked a little already about the brilliant Seth Godin and his 2 books, The Dip and The Icarus Deception, which were really very foundational for me. They've really set me on the path that I'm on and got me thinking along lines that have allowed a law firm to flourish. And it's because of his ideas and those books and others, combined with this contacts list that I think that you should be building for yourself right now. I mean, like start today, because this is a long lead time item if this is not something that you've done before. They've really allowed me to move ahead successfully. And I'm going to attribute almost everything I'm going to say for the rest of this video to the brilliant Seth Godin. There's a lot of paraphrasing, but some quotes in here as well. And I've talked about his concept of, the connection economy, which replaces this industrial economy of the last, 150 years, right? And it's a very different world we're in right now. The industrial economy, it prized assembly line style compliance. And, I think that the age of compliance is dead right now, right? The AIs will edit your work for you. They'll find typos for you. Heck, the AIs will even write the content for you. So it used to be when I started my practice that there was this focus on quality, on making things to specification, pumping out law briefs the way that an assembly line might turn out an automobile. And I think that that's, as Seth Godin, I think correctly points out, is sort of a vestige of an era that we're not in anymore. Modern education, Seth Godin argues, you can trace it back to 150 years ago when what we needed was people who could build something to spec. They could be on an assembly line and they could get the right answer again and again. And if you think about the way that we've learned in classrooms, it's very similar, right? We're taught to hear something and repeat the right answers back at the teachers, sort of like the manufacturing assembly line of the past industrial age. Godin argues, at least my interpretation, that the way that we've been taught in the past, in school and otherwise, was in service of a world that doesn't really exist anymore. And now, as Godin says, quality is assumed. He makes the point that the connection economy, how easy it is for people to connect with each other through social networks, has made competence and this sort of like assembly line making something to spec not particularly valuable, right? And in this new connection economy where people have attention that's not unlimited, right? People are going to choose the content that they're going to take in. What is more important now is, the recognition that the people who we might be trying to sell to have this insatiable desire for things that are new and real and important. And one of the things that's worked for me in my practice is reaching my potential clients with something that is new and real and important. And often it comes in the form of videos like these. It's a key to my practice. I'm going to talk about it much, more deeply in the future. But as Seth Godin says, the internet is a connection machine, right? It allows everyone to be connected to everyone else. It's changed the way people get jobs. It's changed the way they get clients, and now it's the bridges that people build between themselves that generate value. As Godin says, the connection economy enables endless choice and there's endless shelf space, right? There's no limit to how many videos can be, on YouTube, right? The new economy puts a premium on is attention and trust, right? And those things are not endless. Attention and trust are not endless, and they must be earned, right? Which is the challenge of the times that we're in right now. Capturing people's attention and trust are key, right? And I've talked about the safety zone and the comfort zone, Seth Godin ideas, and I've talked about how they're not the same. But back when I started my law practice, I was comfortable and safe, knowing that being a lawyer was being part of an exclusive kind of a guild where, the right answers were locked away in law libraries where you couldn't even get in physically through the door unless you had a law license because there were law librarians and other gatekeepers that would keep you away. In this day and age, most reported cases can be found online. Wikipedia and Google have answers for many legal questions that our clients might be asking, right? I mean, we're not going to take what we find in Google or Wikipedia without a grain of salt. But now, if I want to figure something out, whether it's, how to, unclog my plumbing or how to, replace a roof, I'm going to YouTube, and our potential clients are doing the same thing. Okay. So, I think it's worth pausing to consider whether we're in an era whether lawyers are going to be rewarded by clients for simply knowing the law, right? And I think Seth Godin would argue that the answer is no, and certainly I think that's my opinion. I think that, as Godin says, that the new safety zone is not making the widget faster, and cheaper in a race to the bottom. It's not, how can I write a brief with fewer typos? But the new safety zone where, I think lawyers need to get to is the work of connecting and entertaining, people with, amazing things, with our most vivid dreams. These are Godin's thoughts and Godin's words, but, he argues that anyone with talent or passion, and I would say that if you're a practicing lawyer, then you have talent and passion, certainly for some things that relate to your practice, but anybody with, some talent or passion can leverage these social networks created by this new connected economy to increase impact, right? And creating ideas that spread and connecting the disconnected are the two pillars of our new society, according to Godin, right? The new scarcity, he argues, is this emotional labor of creation. He calls what people create art, and he argues that art is a word that shouldn't have an overly narrow definition. I certainly think that, creating videos like this and creating content, talking about legal concepts in ways that can make our potential clients' lives easier, answering questions for them in an ethical way that doesn't cross the line into giving legal advice. I think that that is how we can leverage our connections to increase impact, right? And so, the risk involved in digging deep to connect and surprise, and the patience required to build trust, and the guts necessary to say, I made this video for you. It's not legal advice, right? And it's not the whole story, but if you're looking for answers online, I'm going to meet you where you are. This is, that's scarce and valuable, and it's something that scales. Okay. And it's something that has been an important part of my practice. And so I take to heart what Seth Godin says, is that doing these kinds of things, creating and shipping art in his language, doing them regularly and with abandon is where the new safety zone lies, right? And maintaining the status quo and, fighting to fit in a world that doesn't exist anymore, because our economy and our culture have changed. These are the things to be thinking about, right? And the safety zone now is not as comfortable as the last one that we were in, right? It was much more comfortable for me to sit, on the 72nd floor of the Sears Tower in my corner office and bury my head in a legal brief and to try to figure out how to punctuate things properly. But that is not what our potential clients, I think, are going to necessarily reward us for in the future. People's attention is not unlimited. They're going to choose who they want to hear from and what they want to hear. And I think being somebody that can market at scale and can make connections with many people is going to be an important part of the way law practice goes, for the next few decades. And so if you only remember one thing from these videos, the one thing that you should be doing today, no matter what your law practice looks like, no matter whether you're going to continue working for somebody else or start your own law firm, what you need to do and you need to start doing today is to build up your contacts list now, okay? Because it's a long lead time tasks. It takes a lot of time and a lot of attention to make sure that you've captured the contact information of the people who are likely to be important to you professionally in the future. I think LinkedIn has been a very nifty way for me personally to do it. But my contacts list is something that I've built over the last 10 or 15 years. So whether you stop watching these videos after this one or whether you continue on to the rest, I would urge you to build your contacts list now. In this new connected economy that we live in, connections are currency.